many trends that people have plausibly identified as contributing to low fertility. I'm not going to argue about which or how strong, but it's remarkable just how many strong trends there are contributing. So once I realized that a year and a half ago, I had previously been spending a year thinking about fertility, and I said, I need to study culture because I need to understand how this works, what's going on. And in looking at could culture be going wrong, I could identify a whole bunch of other trends that might plausibly be seen as going wrong. It's not clear they are, but there's a lot of fear, reasons to fear that culture is going wrong. So then the question is, well, how could that be? How could culture go wrong? So I'm going to review for you now sort of basics of cultural evolution to help you see maybe how things could be going wrong. So culture is humanity's superpower. It's the reason that we are better than all the other animals in terms of being able to evolve so much faster. And it's not that complicated, which is kind of scary. It's just natural selection. And in fact, it's less fancy. It's got less fancy little tools and gizmos that make it work better than DNA evolution does. DNA evolution has a lot of actually fancy machinery to make it work well, but this is new and it doesn't work so well. It's just basic, straight natural selection, but the key idea is we can copy from more than just our parents. We can inherit from associates in our and previous generations, and that allows us to just grow a lot faster. Now, a lot of the unique human things are probably due to cultural evolution. They are probably in us because we first had the capacity for this, stronger than the other animals, and then we use that to evolve a lot of things, including language, reason, all sorts of stuff. Now, a key point about cultural evolution is it doesn't work if you copy stuff at random from other associates in your world. You have to preferentially copy stuff that's better than average, so you need a heuristic to decide what's better than average, and one of our main heuristics, probably the first one, was status. We copy high status people and what they do, and then we can all grow and learn things faster. Now, over time, we've learned other kinds of cues, like now if you want to learn how to fish, you copy the people who fish best, not necessarily the highest status aristocrat somewhere. And then we learn to fish faster because we have collected lots of specific heuristics about what to copy where, but we have a lot of cases where we don't really know who to copy about something, so we just generally go with status. So this powerful thing of cultural evolution, again, it can go wrong in like two particular ways. One is if we just have bad status markers, it can go wrong. So for example, people in the field have argued that our current emphasis on education as a status marker has been part of the contribution to fertility decline. And in the past, people may have used wealth as a status marker, which encouraged parents to have fewer kids so that each kid could be wealthier. And that often caused fertility decline in the past, supposedly. But the key point is it can go wrong. And another way it can go wrong, which I'm going to suggest it does go wrong, is it has a set of parameters. So like if you're driving a car, you need the parameters to be right to actually be able to stay on the road. If the parameters go wrong, it doesn't work. So that may be happening with culture. So a thing editorially to notice is the people who study cultural evolution, the academics, they are not the very high status. It's kind of seen as a squishy, sloppy area. But the people who argue for changing our culture are the highest status people we have. The pundits who try to push for cultural change, they are enormously high status, and they are our greatest heroes as cultural activists, but the people who abstractly study culture is what I switched to trying to do. That's low status, but hey. So now there's a key distinction I want to get to your head that which is the distinction between innovation in and of. What the heck does that mean? So let's go to biology, because cultural evolution is biology. It's just a new kind of biology, but the key concept of adaptiveness is still relevant, a concept of inheritance. So let's just talk about ordinary DNA evolution for a while. Think about the world as full of habitats. Some habitats are big and some are small. That's the key point. Like rivers, coral reefs, tropical rainforests, they have lots of little tiny habitats, whereas other places like big ocean regions, they are huge habitats. Why does that difference matter? Well, in the big habitats, you have huge species, but not very many species. In the fragmented habitats, you have lots of little species. And it turns out when you have big species, evolution within those species is faster. You have more places to originate innovations, more places for them to spread. Evolution in is better when you have fewer big species. But evolution of the features that species share that define the species, that works faster when you have lots of little fragmented species. Now, it turns out life on Earth today preferentially comes from the fragmented places, which suggests that evolution of species really matters more than evolution in species. That's a really important part of evolution, evolution of the features that species share, even though you might not think that was so important. All right, let's talk about culture, but I want to talk about a more accessible kind, corporate cultures. We also have industries where we have a few big firms and industries with lots of little firms, the same sort of fragmented versus integrated firm cultures. Basically, our biggest firms don't last very long. They only last on the top list for 20 years. Only 10% of the stock value of most companies of these big companies is in identifiable things you can see. Most of the rest is in culture. And CEOs know this. They know that, in fact, cultures tend to go bad, and that's why these firms don't last very long. And so a few big firms tend to have more innovation in the firm, but the culture, which is sort of shared across the firm, to have innovation of that, you need lots more firms. So you want and in fact, industries with the fragmented firms are more innovative because innovation of firms matters more than innovation in firms. But typically, firm culture just goes bad, even though CEOs have enormous incentives to make that not happen, and powers, compared to our macro cultures. They have a lot more power, but they still fail, and commonly they have big cultural change initiatives that cost enormous amounts of money, take 5 years, and still are usually said to fail. So that's a key warning about other cultures. It's really hard. So the main thing that means corporate cultures still work is selection. We keep throwing away the cultures, the firms that have bad cultures, and starting new firms with better cultures, and that's the reason we slowly have better cultures, even though each firm's culture tends to go bad. That's how natural selection of cultural evolution works. You need a lot of cultures to select out the few better ones and throw away all the bad ones. So now we can get to macro cultures. And the warning, we think of macro cultures as these larger units within which our attitudes toward fertility, major norms, religion, all those sorts of things. We also have in versus of in these levels. And notice that our leaders in macro cultures have much weaker powers and incentives to fix agricultural problems. And think about how the context of cultural evolution has changed over, say, the last 3 centuries. 3 centuries ago, our world had hundreds of thousands of little peasant cultures, each of which was on the edge of survival, facing war, famine, pandemics all the time. When they went bad, they just died and were replaced by nearby cultures. And then in the last few centuries, we merged these peasant cultures into national cultures. Read Peasants into Frenchmen, famous history of how that happened in France. And then after that, we merged lots of different national cultures into a global monoculture, especially among elites. So variety has gone way, way down. And now we're much richer, peaceful, healthy. So pandemics, wars, famines don't kill us off anymore. And so these macro culture is not being selected. There's little variety, little selection. And in addition, our environment is changing faster than it did, which is also another thing that makes it hard for evolution to track changes if evolution change crashes. And in addition, we celebrate cultural activists who try as hard as they can to change culture. That is, this is a key thing that's been happening, is that we have changed our culture to, these traditional peasant cultures, they were wary of change. They were trying to preserve a long-standing culture, and they were trying not to let it change very fast. We switched in the modern era to celebrating and eagerly trying to change our culture, and cultural activists are our greatest heroes. And that's also causing a lot of change in culture that doesn't seem to be tracking adaptive pressures and therefore is plausibly maladaptive. And so the prediction here is that because we have a few big cultures, innovation within our culture is great. So technology, business practices, et cetera, because we have a huge integrated world culture, we have spectacularly fast innovation, unprecedented rates of innovation within our macro culture. But the evolution of the features that we share in a macro culture, that's not going well because we don't have enough variety of selection pressure and all this activism. And so plausibly, there's 2 ways things can be going wrong. One is we could just be doing a random walk in the space of possible cultures, and that random walk takes us away from what previously we had selected for being an adaptive cultures centuries ago. And plausibly, for example, World War II was the biggest cultural event of the last century, and it was pretty random. The rise of Hitler was random, who won the war was random, so it just caused this huge random change. And if you look at actually, we have a lot of literature on, say, movies and songs and what makes them popular, and apparently there's just a lot of randomness. It's very random. But plausibly, at least that would be sort of give an even chance of going in the right direction, maybe, if there's a right or wrong direction. But worse, it seems like we could also be having a drift where, because of the relaxive selection pressure, we're drifting back to a more natural state that isn't so adaptive. That is, once there was a human nature which was selected to be adaptive in our ancient environments, and then when our environments changed, selection pressures allowed human nature to change. We changed from foragers to farmers, and farmers are really quite different socially with their norms and attitudes from foragers, but selection pressures created that difference, and we became a different kind of people as farmers. But then, with the relaxation of selection pressures, we drifted back, say, to be more forager-like, and that could plausibly explain a number of major trends in the last few centuries. We are, favor more travel, more democracy, more leisure, more promiscuity, less slavery, less war, less religion. Plausibly, a number of trends are explained as a drift back to being more forager-like because selection pressure turned off. And another plausible story might be, look, human nature might be naturally lazy, selfish, and present-oriented, because that's just easy to implement. And it might have taken cultural selection pressures to make us less lazy, less selfish, less focused on the moment. But as selection pressures went away, we've drifted back to being decadent, basically. And these trends then plausibly are the result of being rich and comfortable and having this great world monoculture where we can all share all these innovations in culture, but the overall effect is we are drifting as a macroculture out of adaptation. And unfortunately, it's not easy to fix this. I only had 15 minutes, so I'm not going to tell you how to fix it. Just going to try. I just wanted to try to make the problem clear to you that as hard as fertility is to fix, at least I know of a way to fix it if we would do it. We have a deeper problem maybe that's causing a fertility problem, which is cultural drift, and that's actually much harder to fix. Sorry for the bad news. But that's my 15-minute talk.